Imagine this. You're sitting in a room full of people, but you feel completely invisible. The conversation flows around you like water around a stone, and every time you speak, it's as if your words disappear into a void. You try harder. You explain yourself more clearly. You react with more emotion, more passion, more desperate energy. But the harder you try, the smaller you become. The more you explain, the less they understand. The more you react, the more they dismiss you. Now, imagine something even more unsettling. What if I told you that this moment, this painful, soul-crushing moment of invisibility, is not your lowest point, but your greatest opportunity? What if the very thing that makes you want to scream, to fight, to prove your worth, is actually the doorway to the most profound freedom you'll ever experience? Stay with me, because what we're about to explore together might just rewire the way you see your life and your choices forever. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to this channel, leave a like if these insights resonate with you, and share your thoughts in the comments. What you're about to discover could fundamentally change the way you understand yourself, your relationships, and the very nature of your existence. Let's begin this journey into the depths of human psychology and the revolutionary wisdom of Carl Jung. There's a moment, and you know this moment intimately, when your soul begins to scream. Not the kind of scream that others can hear, but the silent, desperate cry that echoes through every fiber of your being. It's the moment when you realize you've been performing your entire life, dancing like a marionette to invisible strings, explaining yourself to people who were never listening, reacting to provocations designed to keep you small. You've been in countless conversations where you felt the need to defend your perspective, to make them understand, to prove that you're not what they think you are. You've sent those late-night messages, crafting the perfect explanation, the definitive response that will finally make them see your worth. You've stayed in relationships romantic, familial, professional, long after your soul began withering, because leaving felt like admitting defeat, like proving you were exactly as weak as they said you were. But here's the paradox that Carl Jung understood better than perhaps any thinker who came before him. The moment you stop trying to be understood by those who refuse to see you is the moment you begin to understand yourself. The moment you stop explaining your worth to people who have already decided you're worthless is the moment you discover your true value. The moment you stop reacting to their provocations is the moment you reclaim your power. This isn't just psychology. This is archaeology of the soul. We're digging through layers of conditioning, through decades of learned helplessness, through generations of inherited trauma that taught us that our survival depends on being liked, understood, accepted by people who may not even like themselves. Jung called this the process of individuation, the journey toward becoming whole, authentic, sovereign. But what he discovered, through decades of studying the human psyche, through his own dark night of the soul, through watching thousands of patients struggle with the same invisible chains, is that individuation requires something that feels like death. It requires the death of the false self, the version of you that exists only to please others, to avoid conflict, to maintain the illusion of harmony while your inner world burns. You see, there's a war happening inside you right now. On one side is your authentic self, the part of you that knows your worth, that understands your value, that recognizes when you're being disrespected or manipulated. On the other side is your conditioned self, the part that was trained from childhood to believe that love is conditional, that acceptance must be earned, that your very right to exist depends on making other people comfortable with your existence. This conditioned self is not weak. In fact, it's incredibly strong. It has kept you alive through situations where authenticity might have been dangerous. It learned to read the room, to adapt, to become whatever version of yourself would be most palatable to those around you. But now, this survival mechanism has become a prison. The very thing that once protected you is now destroying you. Think about the last time someone dismissed your feelings. What did you do? Did you let it go? Or did you spend hours, maybe days, crafting the perfect response? Did you find yourself explaining not just your perspective, but your right to have that perspective? Did you notice how their dismissal sent you into a spiral of self-doubt, making you question not just what you said, but who you are? This is the trap Jung saw so clearly. When we react to disrespect, we validate it. When we explain our worth to people who have already decided we're worthless, we give them the power to determine our value. When we stay in situations that require us to constantly prove we deserve basic human dignity, we slowly forget what dignity feels like. But here's where it gets truly terrifying and truly liberating at the same time. What if you simply disappeared? Not physically, not dramatically, not with grand gestures or final speeches or burning bridges. What if you just stopped? Stopped reacting, stopped explaining, stopped being available for relationships that require you to betray yourself just to maintain them. The thought alone probably makes you uncomfortable. Your conditioned self is already whispering its familiar refrains. But they'll think I'm rude. But I need to make them understand. But what if I'm wrong? But what if I'm being too sensitive? But what if they never speak to me again? And to that last fear, Jung would ask you the most important question you'll ever consider. What if they don't? What if the people who can only maintain a relationship with you when you're small, compliant, and constantly available for their emotional dumping ground? What if those people simply let you go? Would that be a loss? Or would that be the most profound gift you could receive? This is where we encounter the great paradox of human relationships. The people who truly love you will never require you to disappear parts of yourself to earn their affection. They won't demand constant explanations for your boundaries. They won't punish you with silence, manipulation, or emotional withdrawal when you fail to meet their unrealistic expectations. The people who truly see your worth will never make you beg them to acknowledge it. But the people who benefit from your confusion, who thrive on your self-doubt, who need you to be perpetually uncertain of your own value, these people will fight hardest against your awakening. They will pull out every manipulation tactic they've ever learned. They will accuse you of being cold, cruel, selfish, ungrateful. They will rewrite history to make themselves the victim and you the villain. They will do everything in their power to pull you back into the dance of reaction and explanation, because your freedom threatens the very foundation of their power over you. Jung understood that this moment, this choice between remaining in familiar dysfunction or stepping into the unknown territory of self-respect, is the most crucial decision any human being can make. It's the difference between living someone else's idea of who you should be and discovering who you actually are when no one is watching, when no one is judging, when no one is demanding that you perform your worthiness for their approval. There's a reason this feels so terrifying. Your nervous system was wired in childhood to believe that acceptance equals survival. If the adults around you were inconsistent, if their love came with conditions, if you had to earn your right to be seen and heard, then your brain created a simple equation: please others equals stay safe. And that equation has been running in the background of your consciousness for decades, driving decisions that serve your survival but starve your soul. But what if survival is no longer enough? What if you're ready to move beyond mere existence into authentic living? What if you're prepared to discover what your life looks like when it's not constantly being shaped by other people's expectations, manipulations, and demands? This is the threshold we're standing on together. This is the edge of the known world, where everything familiar drops away and something entirely new becomes possible. Jung called it the encounter with the self. Not the self that was shaped by trauma and conditioning, but the self that exists beyond all of that, the essential you that has been waiting patiently for decades for you to remember who you really are. But before we take that step, before we explore what lies beyond the need to react and explain, we need to understand exactly how we got here. We need to examine the invisible forces that shaped us, the hidden psychological mechanisms that keep us trapped in patterns of people-pleasing and self-betrayal. We need to understand not just what we're walking away from, but why it became so difficult to leave in the first place. Because the journey toward authentic selfhood is not just about changing behavior. It's about understanding the deep psychological structures that created those behaviors in the first place. It's about recognizing the ways our past continues to control our present, and how the very relationships we think are keeping us connected are actually keeping us imprisoned. Are you ready to look deeper? Are you prepared to discover the hidden forces that have been shaping your life from the shadows? Because what we're about to uncover will change everything you think you know about relationships, about yourself, and about what it truly means to be free. The prison you're living in wasn't built in a day. It was constructed brick by brick, starting before you could even speak, before you had words for what was happening to your soul. And the most insidious thing about this prison is that it doesn't look like one. It looks like love. It looks like family. It looks like belonging. Carl Jung discovered something that shattered every comfortable assumption about human development. Through his revolutionary work with the unconscious mind, he found that most of what we call personality is actually a sophisticated survival system, a collection of adaptive strategies we developed not to thrive, but simply to make it through childhood alive. Jung called this survival system the persona, the mask we wear to navigate social situations, to earn approval, to avoid punishment. But here's what changed psychology forever. For most people, the persona isn't just a mask they put on in public. It becomes their entire sense of identity. They mistake the survival strategies of a frightened child for their authentic adult self. Think about your earliest memories of having to explain yourself. Maybe you were 5 years old, and you broke something accidentally. Instead of comfort, you received interrogation. Why did you do that? What were you thinking? And in that moment, your developing brain made a crucial connection. My worth depends on having the right answers. Or perhaps you expressed a feeling that made adults uncomfortable. Instead of validation, you received correction. Don't be dramatic. You're being too sensitive. And your unconscious mind filed away another survival rule. My emotions are dangerous. To be loved, I must only feel what others can tolerate. These moments seem small, forgettable even. But Jung understood that the human psyche is like a recording device that never stops. Every interaction gets stored in the unconscious, creating a complex map of what's safe and what's dangerous, what earns love and what invites abandonment. This is what Jung called generational trauma, the unconscious transmission of survival strategies from parent to child. Your parents taught you to explain yourself not because they were malicious, but because they were never allowed to exist without explanation. They taught you to react to every provocation because they learned that ignoring disrespect was dangerous. Here's where Jung's insights become truly revolutionary. This survival system doesn't just shape our childhood. It actively seeks to recreate the conditions of our original wounding throughout our entire adult life. This is why you keep finding yourself in situations that require you to prove your worth. This is why you attract people who make you feel like you're never quite good enough. Jung called this repetition compulsion, the unconscious drive to recreate familiar patterns, even when those patterns are destroying us. Your unconscious mind would rather have familiar pain than unfamiliar peace, because familiar pain feels like home, while unfamiliar peace feels like danger. This is the threshold Jung wrote about. The moment when you must choose between the familiar prison of people-pleasing and the terrifying freedom of authentic selfhood. It's terrifying because when you're free, you're responsible for your own choices, your own happiness, your own sense of meaning. But it's also the most profound liberation possible, because for the first time in your life, you're not living someone else's idea of who you should be. You're simply, authentically, unapologetically yourself. And that, Jung understood, is what every soul is ultimately seeking. Not to be understood by everyone, but to understand itself. Not to be accepted by all, but to accept the totality of its own experience. Not to explain its worth to others, but to recognize that its worth was never in question to begin with. But how do we move from understanding this intellectually to actually living it? How do we break free from patterns that have been decades in the making? Because understanding the problem is just the beginning. The real work lies in discovering what happens when these invisible chains begin to break. Here's what nobody tells you about living in constant explanation mode. You're not just exhausting yourself. You're training everyone around you that your boundaries are negotiable, your worth is debatable, and your peace is optional. Every time you react to disrespect, you teach people that disrespecting you gets them attention. Every time you explain yourself to someone who's already decided not to understand, you show them that your energy is freely available for their entertainment. Every time you stay in a conversation that's draining your soul, you signal that your well-being is less important than their comfort. You think you're being kind. You think you're being mature. You think you're taking the high road. But Jung would tell you something devastating. You're actually enabling your own abuse. This is the hidden consequence of chronic people-pleasing that destroys lives. You become addicted to your own suffering. Your nervous system gets so accustomed to chaos, drama, and emotional roller coasters that peace literally feels boring. Healthy relationships feel unstimulating. Respectful people seem uninteresting. Think about it. When was the last time you felt genuinely excited about someone who treated you well from the beginning? Someone who respected your boundaries, appreciated your worth, and didn't require you to prove yourself. If you're being honest, they probably felt too easy, too simple, maybe even too boring. This is what psychologists call trauma bonding. Your brain literally rewires itself to crave the familiar cocktail of stress hormones that comes from unstable relationships. The anxiety, the uncertainty, the constant need to prove yourself. It becomes your normal. It becomes your addiction. Jung discovered that most people aren't seeking healthy relationships. They're seeking familiar ones. They're not looking for peace. They're looking for the chaos that feels like home. They mistake intensity for intimacy, drama for depth, struggle for significance. Here's the neurological reality. Every time you explain yourself to someone who dismisses you, your brain releases the same stress chemicals it would if you were being physically attacked. Your cortisol spikes, your adrenaline surges, your nervous system goes into survival mode. This is what Jung meant when he wrote about the death of the soul. It's not a dramatic, obvious death. It's a gradual suffocation, a slow dimming of your light, a quiet surrender of everything that makes you uniquely, authentically you. You lose yourself so gradually that you don't even notice it's happening. One day you wake up and realize you don't know what you actually think, feel, or want anymore. You've become so skilled at reading other people's needs that you've forgotten how to read your own. But here's the thing about rock bottom. It's solid ground to build on. The moment you recognize that you've been living in this cycle, that you've been addicted to your own suffering, that you've been training people to disrespect you, that's the moment your real life can begin. Because once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. Once you understand how you've been participating in your own diminishment, you can choose differently. Once you realize that your worth was never up for debate, you can stop defending it to people who are never going to recognize it anyway. The question is, are you ready to feel what real peace feels like? Are you prepared to discover what happens when you stop feeding your energy to people who only see you as a source of validation, drama, or control? Because what comes next isn't just about changing your behavior. It's about completely rewiring your relationship to yourself and everyone around you. Here's the radical truth Jung discovered. The moment you stop explaining yourself, you become dangerous to people who need you confused. The moment you stop reacting, you become threatening to people who feed off your emotional energy. The moment you disappear, you rob them of their favorite drug, your attention. This is why they'll fight so hard to pull you back in. This is why they'll escalate their behavior when you start withdrawing. This is why they'll suddenly become loving, apologetic, or desperate when you stop being available for their games. It's not because they've realized your worth. It's because they've realized they're losing control. So let's talk about how to actually break free. Not just intellectually understanding the pattern, but physically, emotionally, psychologically extracting yourself from decades of conditioning. First, you have to understand that disappearing is not about becoming cold. It's about becoming selective. It's not about shutting down emotionally. It's about choosing where you invest your emotional energy. It's not about being cruel. It's about being discerning. The people who deserve your explanation will never demand it. The people who deserve your reaction will never try to provoke it. The people who deserve your presence will never take it for granted. Start here. Notice who in your life makes you feel like you have to prove you're a good person. Notice who leaves you feeling drained after every interaction. Notice who only reaches out when they need something from you. These are your practice people. These are where you begin your disappearing act. When they text you with their drama, don't respond immediately. When they try to provoke an emotional reaction, stay silent. When they demand explanations for your boundaries, offer none. Just observe their response. Watch how quickly they reveal that they were never interested in understanding you. They were interested in controlling you. You're not responsible for managing other people's emotions. You're not obligated to explain your boundaries. You're not required to make your healing palatable to people who benefited from your brokenness. Your only job is to protect your peace and honor your truth. Everything else is optional. But what happens after you've successfully disappeared? What comes next when you've reclaimed your energy, your peace, your sense of self? Because the real transformation isn't just about what you're walking away from. It's about what you're walking toward. And that final realization might be the most powerful thing you'll ever discover about yourself and the nature of authentic living. Here's the truth they don't want you to know. The moment you stop needing other people to understand you is the moment you finally understand yourself. The moment you stop explaining your worth is the moment you realize it was never in question. The moment you disappear from spaces that require you to shrink is the moment you discover how magnificent you are when you're allowed to expand. But this isn't the end of your journey. This is where your real life begins. Because something extraordinary happens when you stop reacting, stop explaining, and start disappearing. The noise quiets down. The chaos settles. And for the first time in perhaps decades, you hear something you'd forgotten existed. Your own voice. Not the voice that's been trained to please, to accommodate, to explain. Not the voice that's been shaped by trauma, by fear, by the desperate need to be accepted. But your authentic voice. The one that knows exactly what you want, what you need, what you will and will not tolerate. The voice that's been waiting patiently beneath all the conditioning for you to remember who you truly are. Jung called this encounter with your authentic self the most terrifying and most liberating experience a human being can have. Terrifying because it means taking full responsibility for your life, your choices, your happiness. Liberating because it means you're no longer at the mercy of other people's opinions, moods, or manipulations. You discover something shocking. You were never the problem. You were never too much, too sensitive, too demanding. You were just giving your authentic self to people who couldn't handle authenticity. You were offering your genuine heart to people who were only interested in controlling it. The moment you stop explaining, you start evolving. The moment you stop reacting, you start reclaiming. The moment you disappear from spaces that require you to diminish yourself, your real life, your authentic, magnificent, unapologetic life finally begins. So ask yourself one final question. Where in your life are you still performing for people who will never appreciate the performance? Where are you still explaining yourself to people who have already decided not to understand? Where are you still fighting for spaces and hearts that have no room for who you truly are? And then, with all the love and respect you've been trying to earn from others, give yourself permission to simply, quietly, powerfully disappear. Not because you're giving up, but because you're finally ready to show up as who you truly are. And that person, that authentic, sovereign, magnificent person, doesn't need permission from anyone to exist. You've always been enough. You've always been worthy. You've always been deserving of respect, understanding, and love. The only thing that's changed is that now you know it. And knowing it changes everything. Don't react, don't explain, just disappear. And watch your real life begin.